Hey everybody, I'm Elizabeth McSwan, and today's video is a How I Got the Shot story entitled The Christmas Barred Owl. So here we go. So a few days before Christmas, I posted this shot of a beautiful barred owl that I had the pleasure of photographing. And I wanted to tell the story behind this photograph because I thought it was interesting and I learned some stuff, and I thought that I could pass that entertainment and lessons on to you guys. So my story starts a few days before Christmas. A friend of mine texted me and asked me if I want to accompany him birding at a refuge that I was familiar with. It was close to my house, about a 15 or 20 minute drive away. I said yes, and basically threw out all of the plans that I had to do in preparation for Christmas. So the next day I meet him at this refuge, and it's one of those refuges that you really have to know where you're going. You have to know where it is. It's a little bit hidden. It's not like it has its own, parking lot and visitor center. It's nothing like that. Basically, there are all these different ways that you can access the refuge, but there's not really kind of a headquarters location. So I parked where I normally park when I go to this refuge, and it's basically just these few spaces perpendicular to the street on this residential street. To my left is what looks like a housing complex, like a small housing complex, and to my right is just a single family home. And between me and this housing complex is this row of white pines. And white pines are the type of pine tree that have the very long, flexible, bendy pine needles, and they're very common in the Northeast. So I'm just kind of casually scanning through these trees because you just never know what you could find. This is an area that's known for raptors, and so you just never know what you can find in a tree. And sure enough, I'm scanning through these trees, and I look up and I see this light-colored blob of a bird sitting in one of these pines, and I just think, oh my god. I put my binoculars up to my face, and sure enough, it's a sleeping barred owl in one of these pine trees. Barred owls are really, really cool owls. They are about medium-sized. They're not the biggest, they're not the smallest, but man, are they efficient hunters. They are just killing machines, and in fact, their range is expanding across the western part of the US, and in part because of that. They're extremely adaptive to humans. They can flourish in more urban areas than you would think, an owl would be or want to be. They're called barred owls because they have this very dark vertical streaking in their feathers, in their breast feathers. I love barred owls because they just have these beautiful, beautiful long kind of breast feathers, and that kind of when they shake them out, kind of reminds me of like a flapper girl kind of dress from the 20s. And they also have these really intense dark eyes. When people think of owls, they think of yellow eyes or maybe orange eyes. These eyes they're very round, and they're very, very dark. I mean, you can't even discern a pupil. They're so dark. They're just really awesome owls. My friend comes, and we're kind of looking around and trying to figure out if there's a good vantage point. And it's pretty buried in these pines, which is very typical for a barred owl, or any owl really. They want to be somewhat protected from elements. This one was kind of basking in the sun, but also from the smaller birds that might mob it, pester essentially the owl. They'll kind of, their safety in numbers, gang up on it and pester it, and maybe until it moves, if they're successful. So we're kind of trying to figure out where is the best vantage point to photograph this owl, and behold, the best owl shot you have ever seen. You ready? Yeah, it's good, right? Guys? Yeah, so this was the best shot that I got. This was my first attempt, and I didn't really try that hard, to be honest, because this particular owl, though really cool to see, was just in a really tricky environment. And it was tricky for two reasons mainly. It was tricky because of the perspective. I can mitigate that to a degree by stepping back and not being as under the owl, despite the fact that you want to be really close, and being kind of under it is closer. But the truth is, your perspective is a lot better if you can step back and get a shot from a little bit further away. The second thing that was working against me here was the environment. The environment was just really sticky, really busy, and the light, though it was nice, it was working against me because it was illuminating branches that were just bright and distracting from the owl. All these things could be kind of mitigated a little bit in post-production, but I just figured, you know what, this is the best I'm going to get right now. It was really hard to find a vantage point that didn't have a stick or some pine needles in the owl's face, so we just went ahead. We looked for evening grosbeaks, didn't find him. So we came back to this owl. It was in a slightly different spot, but in the same tree. And we sort of circled around again and tried to do a little bit better. And I did, like, a little bit better. The most egregious thing I think about this shot is that there's a stick through the eye, which is not ideal. I'm not against taking out branches in post-production, so I would probably, if I was going to post this photo, I would remove that branch at the very least. But there are a lot of other things about this photo that would prevent me from posting it. And it's mainly has to do with the environment. Again, the perspective in this one isn't bad because it's looking down at me a little bit. If you can see the difference between this photo and this photo, where this is a much more neutral head position for the owl, kind of sitting the way that it normally kind of comfortably would. And in this one, it was looking a little bit down at me. If you wait for it to kind of look down at you a little bit, you can mitigate the fact that it's so high up. And this owl was not that high up as far as owls go. It was maybe 20 feet up in the air, maybe not even. It looked a little bit more eye level. I mean, it still looks like it's above my head, but at least it has a little bit more of a desirable perspective. So at this point, we are headed to lunch. You know, we've done sort of our birding morning, and we head to lunch. We do some Christmas shopping. I had decided pretty much when we left this refuge that I was going to come back and try for better photos. And by the time I got back, because the days are so short, of course, around Christmas time, by the time I got back, the sun was really, really low. It was like the last, little bit of sunlight on this bird. But I was able to get this. Now, this is a little bit better. As you can see, the light is really, really great. So while you have branches that are illuminated and things of that nature, it's not as distracting from the owl. It's sort of working more with the owl, which is what you can get when you shoot at this time of day. It's looking at me. It's got a lot of things going for it. The environment is still pretty sticky, but the lighting is just a lot better, and the perspective is doable. So this is okay. This is okay. And I literally watched the light leave this owl. This shot, and then I took this shot. These two shots are about 5 minutes apart. So now I'm thinking, all right, I've got some better things. I've got some better photographs than what I got this morning. I'm just going to stick around, and I'm just going to see what happens when this owl decides to leave this tree. Where it goes, what it does. I was expecting it, to be honest, to completely take off and go somewhere else. I wasn't expecting to get anything else other than it sitting in this tree. But that's not actually what happened. As soon as the light left this owl, maybe not even 5 minutes after, it flies out of these white pines and kind of through, there's this basically this very kind of a little bit brushy, sort of sticky, it's all bare, but it's kind of young trees, bushes, kind of viney stuff, pretty thin, and basically just serves as a property line between this housing complex and this single family home. And this owl just flies out of it, flies through it, and lands in this bare tree, what I think is an oak tree, in the single, just on the other side, on the very edge of this single family home property. And I think, oh my God, I'm okay, I'm going to try to I think I can get something a lot better now, because there are no branches in the way, there are no, pine needles in the face, there's nothing like that. It's a clean shot. I can get something better. And I do get something better, but it's still really challenging, but for very different reasons. So when it first lands, this is the only shot really that I got that the owl was looking towards me, because this owl really didn't care that I was there. It was much more interested in all the other stuff that was happening, all the other kind of sights and sounds, I guess, because the looks that it gave back to me were extremely fleeting. And I do have to say, I really love this perspective in some ways. I love that you can see the back feathers so beautifully. That's something that you don't really get to see a lot with owls, especially woodland owls, because, you know, they're in this sort of brushy, sticky environment, and, you know, you're lucky to get a frontal shot, you know, without any kind of obstruction. So being able to see the back and the way that the wings like kind of fold in and creates the sort of back shape, I just thought was really, really cool. I don't like, particularly with this shot, I don't like this big heavy branch that's above its head, and I would maybe try to get rid of that in post-production. This vantage point is basically from the same vantage point that I photographed it when it was in the White Pines. I just swung my lens around to get these shots. This is a panorama shot because originally this owl was not composed like this. It was composed much more to the right, and with this look to the right, I just wanted more space for it to look into. So I took another shot and I put them together in post-production. Another thing that I really loved about this tree was how much like lichen and texture it had on it. It had just this beautiful texture. Anytime a perch has moss or any sort of lichen or really interesting bark, it's just really, really cool and adds, I think, a really cool element to the composition. But there were some things about this perspective that I didn't love, and I think that if I had stepped back a few steps, I think it would have helped me a lot. But my main concern was the fact that I just wasn't getting a lot from this owl. I wasn't getting a lot of look backs. So I decided to move much more to my left, out of this sticky stuff and around to the back of this tree. And I was able to get shots like this. The shadows are brought up a lot because this owl is incredibly backlit. And that's really unfortunate for me because all of the beautiful light, again, even though there's not a lot of light left, all of the beautiful light that you can get is just completely working against me here. I decided that I was going to go around to the front of the tree, more towards the street. And the problem with that, this owl was in the back of this tree. This shot, this is one that I cropped. It was originally a landscape shot, and I cropped it to portrait orientation. And as you can see, there's a lot going on in the foreground. There are a lot of branches to contend with. And even though now the light is it's much better from this perspective, I don't have a clear shot. I don't have a clear vantage point of this owl. But I'm not out in the front very long before this owl flies super, super low back down into that sort of sticky, that property line area. And so I thought that for sure it had seen prey and that it was going for prey by now, of course, my shutter speed is way too slow to be able to get any of that action. But what I was hoping would happen was that it would pop back up and perch somewhere, but it didn't do that. I can't even see the owl. It's so dark. I can't even see it. And I just know that it's in there. I just take my camera on the tripod and I just kind of like creep around my car. I put it down and I'm looking into this brushy stuff, and I can't see it with my eyes. I put my binoculars up to my face. I see the owl sitting really low on this, I realized later, was this like really big kind of branch that had either fallen or been cut. I don't even know where, because it didn't look like something that would come from that oak tree. It looked like a different kind of tree branch, and it was kind of peering around at the world, not really even at me, but just at the world. I just had to take my camera, try to focus and get a shot, and this was the shot that I was able to get. So that was its first position. So now I'm thinking, okay, I don't know how long this owl is going to stay here, but I'm going to try to get a little bit more around to my left so that I can get a little bit more of the owl. To be honest, I think this is kind of a cool shot, this sort of peering around and not being completely visible. I don't mind that. I kind of like it, but I wanted to see if I could get a little bit more with this owl. So I moved my tripod as much to my left as I could, but there was a car that was parked on my left, so I could only go so far. And I put my tripod down, and while I was doing all of this, the owl actually hopped to a part of this branch that was much better for me, much more out in the open and more towards me. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it that this owl was just sitting here. It was maybe 15 feet away from me. I barely cropped this photo. I mean, this is uncropped, this photo right now, uncropped, unprocessed. It was just sitting there, like so close to me. I could barely breathe, and my heart is going because I'm so excited, and I'm like, okay, focus. I gotta dial in my settings. I wanted to keep my ISO as low as possible, and I basically decided on a 2.5 second shutter, because the barred owl would sort of hold these looks, and this is what happens with a lot of owls too, where they'll look in a direction and they'll hold it for, a couple of seconds, and then they'll do something else. I took maybe 20 shots of this bird, and I would say about 3 or 4 of them were actually sharp. For most of the time, it was because the owl was moving, because anytime the owl was looking remotely in my direction, I would click the shutter and hope that it was sharp and that focus was in the right place, and and everything was kind of dialed in there. Sometimes I would get shots like this where it was looking a direction, it turned around and then it looked back, or it moved. In any case, it moved. But I got a handful of shots. I got enough shots to choose from that I could post that were sharp. Again, it was just, the whole experience was just unbelievable. This sort of area is kind of at a T intersection, so cars were coming around the corner. They were illuminating this bird with their headlights, which was really great for me because it gave me some additional light, and the owl was just sitting there like it was no big deal, which again is just amazing to me. So when I got home, I found a shot that I wanted to post that was sharp and that it, everything going for it, and I processed a little bit, and this is the shot that I decided to post. I did remove this stick right here just because I didn't like it, and I suppose I could have left it, but I decided to remove it. And I cropped it in a little bit. I changed the aspect ratio a little bit so that it's not quite so wide. I made some other subtle adjustments and contrast and things like that. And this was the final image. I'm super proud of it. It was just such a thrill. But the story's not done there. So I text my friend that I got this amazing photograph of this owl. And the next day we decided to go to the same refuge and try again for the evening grosbeaks. And we do find one. We see a female, and we didn't get any great photos of it, but at least we saw one, which is really cool. My friend also wanted to go back for the owl to see if we could find the owl again. We get there, we park in the same spots, we look up, we look at the white pines, no barred owl. And so we go towards the trailhead. To get there, we had to sort of go around this housing complex in the back, and there's a field in the back. And so we're on the edge of this field, and we're looking into the woods, and all of a sudden we hear this racket from some birds, I think mostly blue jays. And we see this very large bird flying through the woods. And it's the owl again. And it lands really low, like a lot lower than I was expecting it to land. And we didn't see exactly where it landed, but we figured that we could find it. We walk down into the trails, and we find this bird just sitting on a low branch, like it's nothing. It gives us great looks. It doesn't really seem to care that we're there, and I'm able to get this shot of it. The light was really just absolutely beautiful. There was this kind of somewhat uneven layer of clouds, and so sometimes the sun would shine through a little bit more and create this really just beautiful warm light, and sometimes it would kind of get a little bit more diffused and just be really sort of more soft and subtle. And I just had a blast shooting, photographing this owl again. And then this is another one that I got with its eye a little bit open. I don't love the branches in front. This is the sort of more the softer light, the sort of thicker cloud cover that I was talking about. And then there's another one with a little bit more eye contact. So then we go off, we find our evening grosbeak, and we come back to this owl, and it's actually in a slightly different, it's in the same tree, but it's a slightly different position. It's actually lower. And from the path, I could get this shot. Again, the light is just really, really beautiful. And this is one, where it's yawning a little bit. And then this was the shot that I posted where I just darkened the background a little bit, lightened the owl, kind of made it stand out a little bit. And I got another shot, really low and unusual, with beautiful kind of blurry background, even though you can see some of the branches and stuff. Beautiful blurry background with this kind of out of focus foreground elements and stuff. And I just love it. What I learned from this experience was if you have the time to just see what you can get with your subject. If I had said to myself at any point in this story that, oh yeah, that that shot's good enough, I can work with that shot, I would have not come away with the photographs that I did. And not only that, but I wouldn't have come away with the experience that I did. And for me, that's really the most important part, is to experience and to have a relationship with a bird through my lens. This was a very special barred owl, one that I haven't found yet. Going back to that refuge, I've gone back a few times since and I haven't been able to find this bird. Maybe this was just a Christmas present to me from whoever. But I really just loved photographing this owl, and this experience was extremely rare. And I just think that when you find a subject like this, to be thankful for what the subject gives you, and to be thankful for the experience, because it's such a gift. It's such a gift what I got from this owl, and it was one of the best Christmas gifts that I could get, is to have an agreeable subject who allowed me to take its photograph. So that's what I came away with from this experience. So I hope that was entertaining for you guys. I really enjoyed sharing it with you. I'm new here on YouTube, so you know what to do if you like this video. You can also find me on Patreon. The link is in the description below. And until then, happy adventuring, happy shooting, and I'll see you later. Bye.